Now, Devon, there's a lot to talk about. This was the first quarter since the wide-scale work from home mandates were enforced, which continues to impact nearly every company, individual, and industry, not only in the region, but throughout the country. And as a result, the amount of office space that's available on the market is at a 10-year high. But there was still a lot of leasing activity done in the second quarter for both private and public sector tenants. So let's get right into it. How did the DC market fare in the second quarter compared to the first quarter and previous years?
Sure. So, I mean, you've already hit on it. Availability did hit a record high, hitting 17.6%. We've not seen availability hit that since 2009, so since the Great Recession. But really, an interesting change between Q1 and Q2 was the leasing that we saw. So in Q1, by March, we were getting inklings of what was going on with coronavirus and perhaps how it would be affecting our region. And by March, we hit kind of a pandemic pause. Usually by the end of the quarter, we're still adding, leasing deals, adding things going on, but activity immediately slowed down. So only 1.8 million square feet leased, whereas in Q2, there was an 18% increase in leasing activity. So 2.1 million square feet leased. And, just to, explain kind of what that is as far as norm, the quarterly average for the past 5 years has been 2.2 million square feet. So we were kind of on par with the norm. Something important to note, though, is that even though we saw a lot of leasing activity, we don't expect that really to be enough to keep the market from weakening further.
So of the 2 million square feet that was leased, what was the primary tenant base that was driving demand? And can you expand on, what kind of deals were being done? Are these short-term deals? Are these long-term deals? Are they mostly renewals or relocations? What was the trend that we noticed of that 2 million square feet?
So that's a really key component of the leasing activity that we did see, because it was all based of DC's core tenant base, which is, the government, which was about 38% of leasing, associations and nonprofits, that was 22%, and then law firm leasing, 15%. So in total, that made up 75% of the leasing activity that occurred during Q2, just relying on that core tenant base to sustain leasing activity. And then as far as the types of deals, there was an increase in renewals. So over half of deals were renewal deals. And then what we don't usually see is a lot of short-term extensions, which was kind of, different. About 18% of deals were short-term extensions. And we see that as, tenants likely pushing off decisions due to the pervasive uncertainty going on right now as far as what their needs are for, new space.
Yeah, I could certainly speak from my personal experience of my active transactions. Definitely over half have either hit the pause button or have elected to do short-term extensions until some predictability ensues in their business and the overall marketplace. I'm also getting a lot of calls from tenants who are looking for short-term built-out options to help kind of bridge the gap before they need to make longer-term decisions. And naturally, we look to the sublease market for discounted options that are built out and furnished. Overall, how did the sublease market fare and compare to the last quarters?
Sure. So this is a question that I've been receiving a lot mostly because other major markets like San Francisco and New York are seeing large amounts of sublease space come back to their markets. San Francisco has about 50% of their supply is sublease space, and that's a 40% increase from Q1. Similarly, in Manhattan, about 20% of their supply is made up of sublease space. So, that's just a lot of space coming back to their market and increasing the overall availability. Now, while DC's overall availability did increase during Q2, that wasn't necessarily due to a large increase of sublease space supply. And that doesn't mean that DC won't see that. It's just that we, going back to that core tenant base that we have in DC, the government, law firms, they're not shedding space the same way that these other major markets are. So between Q1 and Q2, the sublease availability change only went up from 2% to 2.1%. So, the overall growth, the net positive change was about 200,000 square feet. And for the DC market, that's really just a drop in the bucket. So it was not enough to really increase sublease space overall.
So has there been a fundamental shift in the market dynamics in terms of rental rates and concessions that landlords are offering to secure tenancy. Are we seeing landlords reaching far to secure tenancy that in ways that we otherwise have not seen in the past?
Absolutely. So something unusual about the DC market is that we're a little bit of an outlier. And that's because our rents don't change due to economic uncertainty and even really due to changes in availability. So, our rents quarter over quarter from Q1 to Q2 have remained relatively flat, which was expected. However, concessions are increasing. DC's been a tenant favorable market, for over a decade now, and that's only accelerating at this point. Landlords, like you mentioned, they are in a tough spot right now. They are competing to lease space amongst a shrunken tenant base and stabilize their buildings. So they're, really willing to kind of stretch far to, get those leases signed and fill up their buildings while availability is increasing across the market. So, pretty interesting.
So what are some of the industry sectors you're most optimistic about in terms of growth going forward for the region?
Sure. So, the DC market has really kind of lacked any sort of new growing sector. We did have the co-working sector over the last few years, which really, helped bring that availability down just a little bit and took on a lot of space. WeWork, of course, leading that. But since WeWork has kind of not been doing so well recently, there really hasn't been that same co-working growth. And we've been waiting for a new sector to kind of, be up and coming. Now, for the region, we think that that's probably going to be the technology sector, especially in the Northern Virginia market. And that all really kind of kicked off with Amazon giving their, stamp of approval on the region when they decided to move their HQ2 to what was Crystal City and is now National Landing. We've seen a lot of recent, technology leases in Q2 in the midst of the pandemic. Microsoft in Northern Virginia signed for 400,000 square feet in Reston, which was incredible. Joining a lot of other recent, tech leases out there like Google. And we think that more will likely come. So I think that that is the best sector poised for growth in the near future because the DC region just has a highly educated workforce that, historically has been kind of a brain drain. So a lot of the college graduates from all the amazing colleges that we have in the region have left and gone to other markets like, San Francisco, New York, Chicago. Now we can keep them here and, position them in these tech jobs.
Well, that's a great point. And speaking of the region as a whole, and last question I'll leave you with is, how has the suburban market surrounding Washington performed the last quarter, particularly Northern Virginia and some of the closer in Maryland markets?
Absolutely. Northern Virginia has really held on and proven the resiliency of the region that we're known for. Their availability rates and rental rates have not really changed quarter over quarter. They've remained almost perfectly flat, which is incredible. And then not only has their leasing activity sustained, but it grew last quarter. So whereas in DC, 2.1 million square feet, leased 2.8 million square feet leased in Northern Virginia with a lot of very large leases completed. And that doesn't mean that there isn't further weakening ahead for the market. But so far Northern Virginia is in a really good place. Suburban Maryland, the leasing lessened a little bit this quarter. It did hit more of a pandemic pause. So we're not seeing, that many large deals running through the finish line. But for the most part, the suburban part of our region is doing really well.
Well, Devon, thank you so much. I know that was a lot to summarize in a short amount of time, but you did great. And I appreciate all the research that you and your team has prepared since the beginning of this pandemic. I know it's been a lot to take on. It's been unprecedented circumstances that you guys have really summarized and analyzed very clearly for us and all of our clients. So I'll share the market report in the comments down below. But thank you so much. I really appreciate you speaking with me today.
Absolutely, John. Thank you for taking the time. Always enjoyed.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much.